Amanda was probably the most selfless person you have ever met in your entire life. She made her life about other people. And that's why people were so impacted by her.
On our way to Chicago to take a little romantic getaway.
And I think that is one of the most amazing attributes about Amanda is that she lived her life for something bigger than herself, and she wanted her life to be poured out to help other people. She was faithful. She was steadfast. She was balanced. She was rhythmic. She was always someone that was, she was like an equalizer for our entire family. If anything got kind of out of balance emotionally or whatever, she was the stabilizer for everybody.
Davey Blackburn remembers his wife Amanda, whose life was cut short one terrible day in 2015.
In a murder that has made national headlines.
Shocking the nation. A heartbreaking murder.
A pastor's wife, a 28-year-old mom, shot dead inside of her own home.
Adding to the tragedy, she was 12 weeks pregnant with their second child.
Amanda was rushed to the hospital, placed on life support, but could not be saved.
I was a pastor and a church planter in Indianapolis with my wife of 7 years, and we had a 15-month-old, and we were pregnant with our second. We were 13 weeks along, and I left to go to the gym Tuesday morning, November 10th. And while I was away at the gym, there were three men who were on a random crime spree, moving from the east part of our city all the way over to the west side, which is where we lived. And they broke into the home 3 doors down from us and saw me leave for the gym and decided to take that opportunity to break into our home. And so Amanda, my wife, she got caught up in that scuffle. She was shot 3 times. And when I came home from the gym to find her on the living room floor, she was still breathing. She was unconscious. And so I called the paramedics, and it felt like it took 3 hours for them to get there. It only took 3 minutes because it's just, one of those moments are just so traumatic. Everything's going in fast motion and slow motion at the same time. But what I had thought was that she had miscarried. She often got dizzy spells and in the middle of pregnancies. And so I thought maybe she had fallen and something had fallen on her, and that was the explanation for the blood. There was no context for me to even understand that someone had broken into our home. But when we got her to the hospital and I was in the waiting room and doctors and investigators came in to report to me what was going on, they told me she had 3 bullet wounds. And the prognosis was very grim. And, I believed that she was going to be healed. I don't know if it was faith or shock or naivety or what it was, but I really believed that she was going to be healed in the hospital because I just, those kinds of things are so upending that you don't ever imagine going through something like that in your life. So it just didn't feel real. But 24 hours later, November 11th, 2015, she was pronounced officially deceased. And it was actually 4 years to the day that we had packed a moving van up to move from South Carolina to Indianapolis to plant a church.
Amanda was 28 years old. The pastor chronicles his personal and spiritual repair in his autobiography, Nothing is Wasted, a true story of hope, forgiveness, and find purpose in pain.
It was a very safe neighborhood. It felt so safe that we hardly ever locked our doors. We sometimes would go for a walk with our garage door flown wide open. And so it was just such a random thing that it was so disorienting, not only to have to deal with the upending crisis, catastrophic event of losing my wife in such a violent way, but also just not knowing how to sort through the pieces of how do I help Weston through this? How do I help our congregation through this? And then there was a media firestorm surrounding it too. So it just was layer upon layer upon layer of just complexity with that.
Davey's entire life was turned upside down by the tragedy.
And one of the natural accompaniments to grief is guilt. People try to rationalize, well, what if? What if I had done this? Would that have changed the situation? And guilt can honestly get people very paralyzed because they have to begin to wrestle down and go, okay, I could not have changed this. What happened cannot be undone, but it doesn't have to cause me to be undone. And that's really where I came to, was realizing that there was nothing that I could do to change this. And so Amanda wouldn't want me to, nor would my family want me to be paralyzed by that guilt, but instead to move forward and figure out how to grieve and help my son grieve and help our congregation grieve. And that's really the existential questions that everybody's dealing with when it comes to tragedy or trauma in their life. The huge question of theodicy, which means how could a loving God allow evil and suffering to happen? And so I asked all those questions. Why, God? Why me? Why did you allow this to take place? And what are you going to do about it? How do you avenge this? Because honestly, that's where I believe we find God. I believe that when we wrestle with God, then we really find who the true character and nature of God is.
Of Davey's biggest priorities was his son Weston and how to explain his mother's tragedy to a little boy.
He was 15 months old, so he didn't know what had happened back then. But as he gets older, and especially now as our story has, again, experienced a lot of exposure with the book, and we've got books lying around my house, and he knows, more of the details of what happened. And so we have always tried to walk the tension of being age appropriate, to not expose them to something that's too heavy for them to hold, but at the same time, not try to pull the wool over their eyes in thinking that this world is easy. And I think that with Weston early on, he's going to have to grapple with that more than what another 10-year-old's going to have to grapple with because of what's happened to him. But I'm trusting and believing that when he's 20 years old, he's going to have a more substantial understanding of how to suffer well, of how to live well in a difficult world. And so we just take it a day at a time, a decision at a time, and go. And then we usually take cues from him. If he's curious and he's asking questions, then his heart is probably postured to hear some things. But we don't try to superimpose anything on him. If he's not grieving right now, we don't need to put grief on him. So we just usually take cues from him.
Davey also wondered if he should date again.
And so I felt really in despair. Even, I was 30 years old when it happened. So, of course, I had people come to me and say, well, at least you're young, you're going to find love again, which I didn't want to hear in the first place at all. You don't want to hear that, right? But they were well-meaning. But I also knew in the back of my mind, that's probably true. I'm only 30 years old. But when I finally decided, I felt like about a year later, after I'd gone through a really intense healing journey over that next year, I decided it was time to poke my head up and go, all right. And I started asking God, would she love me? Would she love Weston as if he were her own? And would she love Amanda? Because it would take a very secure woman to step in these shoes, especially since I feel like the assignment and calling on my life is to carry Amanda's story to help other people heal. And so this person wouldn't need to just be able to tolerate that, but be able to champion it. If I go speak somewhere, sit on the front row and champion that. So I felt, honestly, that felt quite impossible. But I ended up meeting Christy at the CrossFit gym that I was working out at, and it woke my heart up. I cannot explain to you other than the fact that, for reasons I don't know, it woke my heart up when I saw her for the first time. Now, I didn't know anything about her. So I got really curious, and she ended up coming to my church with some friends, and she started attending the church and dropping her daughter off in kids ministry. But she avoided me like the plague. She didn't want to have anything to do with me. And I found out later, about 3 months later, why. And it was because she was too closely connected to my story. I asked her, you've been coming to my church for 3 months. Tell me your story. Just tell me more about you. She winds up explaining a bunch to me. And then she said, Davey, I'm more connected to your story than what you'd feel comfortable with. I said, what are you talking about? She said, my stepdad is one of the chaplains for the Marion County prison system. And he visits the 3 men who killed your wife every week. And I was like, wait, what? So here, this girl that woke my heart up that I've been interested in for 3 or 4 months, and now she's that closely connected to my story. I finally convinced her to go on a date with me. At the end of 2017, we got married and blended our family. And so now we have 3 kids, an 11-year-old, Natalia from her previous marriage, Weston from my previous marriage is 10, and then Cohen, who's 4, he's ours.
As Davey continues to rebuild his life and broken heart, he has learned to forgive the 3 men who invaded his home and killed his pregnant wife.
I knew as a pastor the right thing to do and the right thing to say. I had preached messages prior to all of this about how it's important to forgive, that if you don't forgive other people, then it becomes a cancer that rots you on the inside. Bitterness rots the hand that holds it. And so, prior to this, I had preached some really great messages, I felt like, about forgiveness. And then I was confronted with, David, do you really believe what the Bible says? And do you really believe what you're saying? Or what you say you believe? And so early on, I had to choose to forgive. It wasn't a feeling. I had to make a decision. And I think that that is conventional wisdom for everybody. No matter what, if you don't feel like forgiving, you're not going to feel like forgiving. You have to choose, and you have to make that daily decision. And as I began to make that choice, then over time, my heart began to catch up with that. My feelings began to catch up with that.
The culprits, who were just teenagers at the time of the crime, have all been serving time behind bars. Larry Joe Taylor Jr. was sentenced to 86 years in the Indiana Department of Correction for the murder of Amanda Blackburn. Deano Gordon entered a guilty plea to robbery resulting in serious bodily injury and burglary. He will serve 25 years in the Indiana Department of Correction and 5 years suspended. Jalen Watson was sentenced to 29 years for robbery resulting in serious bodily injury and 10 years each for 2 counts of burglary. The sentences will be served concurrently. Davey has not spoken to the 3 men since reading impact statements at each of their sentencings.
I got to look them in the eye and each one of them tell them, let me tell you who Amanda was. Because if you knew who she was, and if you knew how she would have given you the shirt off her back, she loved people. If you knew her, you would have never done this. And you stole something really, really beautiful, someone really beautiful in this world.
Davey explains what he would say to the 3 guys now, if given the chance.
And I would tell them that this doesn't have to be the end of their story. I would tell them that I'm hoping and pleading that they would change. That not just a change of behavior, but they would have a heart change. And rather than stealing from people, rather than robbing and taking life, that they can actually give and contribute to people. And I would implore them that they would turn the page in their story. Because I don't want their life to be wasted either. The pain that we've gone through has been so deep that we don't want any of it to be wasted. And now I have to do my part to make sure that I don't waste my pain. But I would also implore them to do their part to make sure that Amanda's life and everything that's happened isn't wasted in their life too.
For Inside Edition Digital, I'm Sal Bono.